Sage Wanderer here, coming at you from my cabin down by the creek. Hey, I want to give a shout out to my sheep pen viewers. This is Sunday. You were expecting a Sunday sermon today, but what I would like you to understand is that what I do here on this channel is guided by the Holy Spirit. So whether I'm making a political video or a religious video, know this, it's guided by the Holy Spirit. And this morning I woke up with a great Christian sermon to deliver for you today. And the Holy Spirit pulled me up short and said, I want you to talk about this. And I was very critical. I wanted to make sure, so I prayed about it. And sure enough, the Holy Spirit wants me to talk about this political point. And I have been told by the Holy Spirit it's because it's going to be very time sensitive, that here in the near future, this is going to be kind of the central subject that most people are going to be talking about. So today I want to talk about Donald Trump's executive order on birthright citizenship, putting an end to birthright citizenship. But before I get started, I want to thank all of you, whether you're a supporter of the sheep pen or the political side or the coffee talks. If you're watching this video, I want to thank you for your support, and you provide support for this channel that keeps me running, keeps my lights on here in the cabin, and keeps my nose to the grindstone and these videos coming your way. So thank you so much. If you'd like to be a contributor, there's links in the description below. And don't worry, sheep pen, I'll make this sermon up to you. But this is very important. It's why, God wouldn't redirect me this morning if it wasn't important. So Donald Trump signed a slew of executive orders. These executive orders, for the most part, I don't have a problem with them. For the most part, I think they were great, right? But there's one in particular that is clearly and obviously in violation of the United States Constitution on a couple of different levels. It really circumvents Congress. Congress alone makes laws. And it also violates the word and the spirit of the Constitution to begin with. And the big question you got to ask is, why would Donald Trump sign an executive order that is so clearly and obviously in violation of the United States Constitution, the 14th Amendment, Section 1 on citizenship? He doesn't have the right nor the authority to end birthright citizenship. And there's a lot of disinformation being spread, unfortunately, by Trump supporters. Now, I have to stop right here before you still go to slamming Trump and tell you this. I'm a Trump supporter. I voted for Trump. And I agree that there needs that this concept of people traveling to the United States for the purpose of creating a U.S. citizen and therefore ensuring their right to be here as well, because their child is a citizen. This is known as the anchor baby problem. I think that needs to be remedied, but this executive order is not the way to do it. So why would Donald Trump sign an executive order he knew was just going to get kicked out of court? All right. And why are these people going around saying things that aren't true? They're saying that this birthright citizenship thing is a new thing since LBJ. I'm going to prove to you today that that is untrue. Now, this very same Supreme Court, mostly this very same Supreme Court, minus one or two people, is the same Supreme Court that gave us the Bruin decision. So what is the Bruin decision? If you're familiar with the Second Amendment and firearms, then you're familiar with the Bruin case. In this finding, the Supreme Court said that you can't just analyze the Constitution based on its language. You have to base it on also the interpretation of it at the time, or the history and tradition. That's the catchword. The history and tradition of the Second Amendment. And this is why gun laws are being shot down all over the country, and we're seeing a reversal of gun control, because these gun laws are not in line with history and tradition. This may be an argument that some people on birthright citizenship are trying to put forth, but they couldn't be further from the truth. This is very much disinformation. The history and tradition of birthright citizenship can be traced back to the end of slavery in the United States. The 14th Amendment, Section 1, the very first words out of it are the words that gave American-born slaves whose ancestors come from Africa freedom and rights as citizens in this country. And it's some of the clearest language you'll ever run into in the Constitution, and it's very hard to misinterpret. It says, and I'm quoting here, this is Amendment 14, Section 1. All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. Okay? You can read that up one side and down the other. And if you're born here, you were born in an American hospital, you're a U.S. citizen. But Donald Trump would like to undo that practice. And it's inappropriate and incorrect to do it with an executive order. So why why did he choose to draft this unconstitutional directive? Well, you need to understand the way a genius mind works. But before we get there, and before I explain why he did it, I'm gonna cover more of this disinformation, because some people are claiming that this was some manufacturing of the New Deal with what's his name, LBJ, Lyndon Baines Johnson, and they are actually. Hang on here, I'm trying to get my reference up. I don't often use notes, but this needs to be note for note here, word for word. So they're saying that this isn't history and tradition, when in fact, I can prove to you right now that the history and tradition of the 14th Amendment, Section 1, has been upheld down through history. So in 1868, this amendment was made part of the Constitution, the part I just read, which defines any person born in the United States as a citizen, regardless of who their parents are. There's nothing in there about who their parents are. But we've already hashed this out. This has been hashed out. Just 30 years after the 14th Amendment was ratified, a case came up in San Francisco. This case is the United States versus Wong Kim Ark, 1898. This case established that a person born in the United States is a citizen regardless of their parents' nationality or race. The case involved Wong Kim Ark, who was born in San Francisco to Chinese parents. And so this was the history and tradition was held up just 30 years after it was made. You can't argue that this means something it doesn't mean, or doesn't mean what it means. If you were born in this country, you're a citizen. End of discussion. It's been that way for over 100 years, 120 odd years. So why are they saying this? Well, I think that they want to back Trump no matter what he does. I think a lot of this is just loyalty. Trump signed it, so I got to defend it, and I'm going to find some way, if I got to even twist the truth, to defend it, right? And I'm not a sycophant like that. If Donald Trump's wrong, I'm going to call him out. But here's the thing. There's wrong because you made a mistake, and there's wrong because you're playing 4D chess. I would argue that it takes a genius to interpret a genius. You know, people of genius level IQ are often thought of as ignorant or idiots. They're often mistaken for mentally challenged when they're young. And there's a whole list of bona fide geniuses that changed this world who are thought of that way when they were young. And it's because geniuses make decisions differently, and they approach problems differently than the average person. And it's because they possess something that I call the power of imagination. If you could for a moment live inside my brain and see the things that I am capable of imagining and seeing in detail. One example is when little Jazzy was choking, and a video that I saw 30 years ago popped in my head in that moment and played in real time. I could pause it and back it up in my mind. That's imagination recreating something I once saw. It's not just memory, it's the ability to imagine things at a deeper level. Chess players use this when they imagine the entire game of chess from this one move they're going to make. That's when they're sitting there staring at a chessboard. They're imagining the entire game play out on a 3D chessboard in their mind. So you kind of need a genius to interpret a genius. If a genius looks like he's doing something wrong, you probably don't have all the information. If he looks like he's making a mistake, it's a calculated and intentional mistake. Let me explain to you. We have a problem in this country with people coming here illegally for the purpose of having a baby. Donald Trump would like to end that, okay? But he can't because the 14th Amendment. He can't because jurisprudence and Supreme Court case law are opposed to him, right? He wants to change something, and he needs to change the Constitution to do it. So when he wrote this unconstitutional and quite ridiculous executive order to end birthright citizenship, it wasn't because he thought that was going to stick. That unfortunately, there's only a few ways to change the Constitution. See, and another element of the genius thought process is that if you have a goal in mind, the average person will look at the goal in the future and then imagine each step it's going to take to get him to his goal, right? But that is not very successful. It's not near as successful as the way geniuses would approach the same issue. They would actually kind of time travel. They would look forward at the goal as though it was accomplished, right? They would travel forward in time with all of the repercussions. They would recreate the world as we know it in that world where your goal is reached. And since hindsight is 2020, they would flip around and look back in time to the present, once again, time traveling through imagination, and see how they got there. It's much more effective to backward engineer a problem than it is to face it head on with basic logic. That you can defy basic logic by going forward in time and looking back. So Donald Trump did this with his goal, with all of his goals. And he has looked at them from this imaginary future that his genius mind allows him to imagine. And he's looked back, and this can allow you to avoid a lot of mistakes because a trap only looks like a trap when you're looking at it from the front. When you look at it from the back, you can clearly see the trap. No, there's a spring, and there's a snare, and there's a pit behind it with stakes sticking up, right? But from the front, it's all camouflaged, and this is the benefit of hindsight. You can invent artificial hindsight if you have enough imagination. So Donald Trump has gone forward in time to a point where we've ended this birthright citizenship in the way it's being interpreted now, and he's looking back in time. And what looks like a mistake is actually a necessary step. And you better be careful trying to defend Donald Trump's mistake, because it's a mistake. He knows it's a mistake. It's an intentional mistake. He's playing 4D chess, and he's setting up his future goal now with what appears to be, to a lot of people, a mistake. So what is the process if you backward engineer this? Let's do the genius thing and backwards engineer this. We're in a future where birthright citizenship has changed in some way. And now you can't come here illegally, give birth to a child, and then get citizenship. How did we get here? Well, the biggest thing standing in his way is the 14th Amendment. The 14th Amendment's language is broad, but very clear. It's not really up for interpretation. It's why in 1898, even though nobody wanted to accept all these children of Chinese immigrants, they did anyway and made them all citizens. And many of our people in Congress and the Senate can trace their lineage back to that same citizenship. They have Chinese or other nations have all benefited from this. And you have to ask yourself why Donald Trump would do this. Why would he make this order which can't stand up in court? Well, before you can change the U.S. Constitution, before you can really make an argument for amending the Constitution, it has to really go through the courts all the way. And we have not had a clear rehashing of this since our recent crisis. So Donald Trump puts out this executive order, knowing full well, and the intention behind it being getting sued. He was sued immediately upon releasing this. He was sued by people in 22 different states. All right, so all the liberal states. This is going to quickly move up through the courts and end up at the Supreme Court. I think there's no way, because of the Bruin decision, history and tradition is the only way to reinterpret the language. The language here is clear in the Constitution. All persons born or naturalized in the United States are citizens. Right? If you're born here, you're a citizen. The only way to undo that is to change the Constitution. But to change the Constitution, before you can even argue that, you have to try to change it through the courts first. So this is step one in a chess match. He knows what he did is not going to stand up in court. He knows there's no basis for it, but it's how you get the ball rolling. So he did this. He's being sued. It's going to move up through various courts and eventually end up at the Supreme Court. And I do believe the Supreme Court will be forced to shoot it down, because what he's trying to do is clearly unconstitutional. It's not really a matter of debate. He has history, tradition, and case law against him, as well as the plain language and verbiage of the 14th Amendment. So it's going to require a constitutional amendment that could take years to accomplish. But you got to start somewhere. Right? He backward engineered this from 15 years in the future when they finally will amend the language in the 14th Amendment to affect this situation. So you can't come here illegally just to have an anchor baby. But there is no method in Congress or in the executive branch to change it because it's constitutional what people are doing. Whether you want to think of that as a loophole, but it's just something that needs to be addressed. Right? And we can't change the Constitution till we first go through the courts. Once you go through the courts, you can then call out the Constitution and the flaws in it and demand that it be amended. This is the process. He's playing 3D chess with you. You know, illegal immigration is not a victimless crime. That people that come here illegally are being victimized. They're being victimized by corporations. It is a quasi-legal way to utilize slave labor. That the people that come here would rather be a slave to the system in the United States than live in another country. Many of them work for below minimum wage. Many of them are paid very little for their labor, and they have to struggle. And that's not by accident. This entire system is set up by corporations. It was the corporations who brought the Chinese in, who utilized the basically slave labor to build the railroads and to mine gold in California. And it's them, they're always going to find a way to go back to slavery. If you are here illegally, you're a victim of slavery, right? Because you're being forced to work for less money. You're being forced to work without benefits. You're being forced to work without rights. So I am for immigration, but for legal immigration, because legal immigration gives you rights as an American. You get the same pay. You get the same benefits. You can utilize Social Security, right, if you're here legally. And those that aren't here legally are actually suffering. But they'd rather suffer in the greatest nation in the world than live in any of the other nations that are around the world. Donald Trump is always going to do things that look like mistakes on the surface, but are just a necessary step. One he came to the conclusion and understanding of by doing that sounds like magic thing I just described, how you travel in time to your eventual goal. Turn around and look at how you got there. The reverse engineering of your life and your goal structure is what allows high IQ people to excel more than any other thing, that ability to imagine their dreams. And so be careful supporting Donald Trump. If someone says it's a mistake and you support him on the mistake, you're going to be left holding the bag. But trust me, it's not really a mistake. It was intentional. He intentionally drafted an executive order that had no chance of standing up in court because he wants it to go all the way to the Supreme Court. He wants to have another ruling. And because of the Bruin decision, they're going to have to find that if you're born here, you can live here, you're a citizen, because that's the way it's been for the last 160 years. So then he can say, look, I agree. The Constitution says it's possible. That's why we need to change the Constitution. And then you can really have some momentum in altering or amending the Constitution, which I think is on Donald Trump's wish list. He would like to see the Constitution amended in a couple of different ways. And I see this as a method and a process for getting there. If you argue that some of this misinformation I'm hearing, you're fighting a losing battle. I've done my homework on this. I'm not a constitutional scholar, but I read real well, and I know how to get information. And all the information suggests that there's never been a time in this country when people that were born here were denied citizenship. There are some exceptions to that, being in that line, subject to jurisdiction thereof. All right. Well, who's not subject to U.S. jurisdiction that are in and under U.S. jurisdiction? Mainly, that's referring to the children of embassy staff, people that are here and they have what's the word I'm looking for? They have political immunity, right? They are here, but they're not citizens of the United States. They're not subject to United States law. If you have, immunity, if you have political immunity because you're part of an embassy staff, you're an ambassador, you work, uh, you can steal from somebody, and the police got to give you back to the embassy. We all know this. You've watched enough spy movies, right? So there really aren't any loopholes. If you go to looking at this, there just aren't any. And that's why every case that I could find always reverts back to the root of this language, which is undeniable. If you're born in the U.S., you're a U.S. citizen. And the only way to change that is a constitutional amendment. I don't believe that the Supreme Court is going to side with Donald Trump on this one. If they do, I would say then that maybe the leftists are right and the Supreme Court is politicalized. It is politicized. It's not really looking at the law the way it's supposed to be, because it's cut and dried. And if you want to change it, you got to change the Constitution. And if you want to provide some real facts in the comment section, we can just have this out. But I've done my homework and I'm not a stupid man. All right. I hope this shed some light on this topic. I hope you refer back to this channel anytime Donald Trump does something that confuses you, because chances are it's a 4D chess move, and it does take a genius to interpret a genius. All right, we'll see you next time.